He didn't believe in ghosts, but the storm sometimes made him wonder. Logan Miles paused in the corridor, halfway between his sleeping unit and the outpost's main console, a steaming cup in one hand and a low ache in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Outside, Incarus 12 howled, the kind of howl that lived in your bones long after the wind stopped, that had once terrified him. Now was background noise. Familiar, predictable, but not tonight, because somewhere between the mechanical shriek of ice shearing across metal and the distant rumble of shifting glaciers, he'd heard something else. Something wrong. It wasn't the sound itself that chilled him. It was what it wasn't. Not the groan of structure, not the static of equipment. It had been organic, soft, almost a moan. He set the cup down and stepped to the reinforced door, triggering the perimeter scan. Proximity alert, anomalous mass, 10 meters. Humanoid profile detected. Status, critical hypothermia risk. External temperature, minus 78 degrees Celsius. Logan cursed under his breath and reached for his suit. No one was supposed to be here. Not this far south. Not this deep into the cycle. And definitely not in a storm like this. He sealed the thermal gear around his frame, oxygen feed clicking into place. The helmet lights flicked on, just two beams piercing into the white void beyond the outpost. Snow blasted against the door as it opened, a violent rush of ice and wind that bit through the suit's outer layer like acid. Visibility, almost zero. He scanned left, right, and then he saw it. Half buried in a drift, just beyond the emergency marker poles, was a shape, curved and crumpled, not stiff like a corpse should be. A body, barely clothed, violet skin, unnatural against the snow. She lay face down, one arm awkwardly folded beneath her, the other stretched toward the outpost door as if she had been reaching for salvation and collapsed inches too soon. He moved. Boots crunched snow. Every step brought a new gust that threatened to knock him off balance, but he powered through. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees and turned her over gently. She was breathing, barely. Her skin was a deep, bruised lavender, marbled with frost. Her lips were cracked, bloodless. One leg was bare to the thigh, her torso covered by a torn strip of polymer fabric that looked more ceremonial than protective. Her arm, fractured at the forearm, had been tied with cloth, blood frozen into the fibers. Her face was striking, even half frozen. High cheekbones, a delicate jawline, long black hair matted with snow and sweat, framing alien features that were almost human. But her eyes, when they opened, were the furthest thing from alive. Violet, glazed, haunted. She opened her mouth. No sound came, just breath. Then, barely a whisper, "Make me your personal slave, human." Logan froze, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way she said them. Not with seduction, not with intent, not even as a plea. It was rote, like a prayer. She collapsed before he could react. He swept her up into his arms, careful not to jostle the broken limb, and turned back toward the outpost. She was burning with fever, but shivering like she'd never feel warmth again. Inside, the blast door sealed shut behind him, locking out the blizzard's wrath. He lowered her onto the med unit table and activated the heat field. Soft red lights glowed around her as the system calibrated her vital stats. Temperature, heartbeat, oxygenation, all dangerously low. He moved fast, stripped the frozen cloth from her body, layer by layer, and covered her with thermal blankets. He wasn't trying to undress her. He was trying to save her. She had no boots, no gloves. Her thighs were covered in bruises, old and new. Scratches, marks. One hip bore a raised scar in a spiral pattern, branding maybe. The other had what looked like a surgical implant, inactive but still active in its subdermal glow. And on her wrist, almost fused into the bone, was a metal band. He leaned in. Engraved text, property, identifier code, 391, LKITH. His stomach clenched. He'd seen that before. Long ago, in another life. In a war zone filled with bodies that screamed without mouths. He took the scalpel from a medkit and sliced the band away. She didn't flinch. He dropped the metal on the tray beside her. It landed with a sterile clink that somehow echoed in the silence. He turned his attention to her arm. Compound fracture. She'd wrapped it herself, and badly. Likely during escape or a fall. He injected a low-dose pain inhibitor near the joint, realigned the bones with practiced ease, and sealed them in a pulse stabilizer. Her body tensed once, then went slack. She shouldn't have made it this far, he muttered to himself, more thought than speech. The storm outside screamed against the walls. Wind whipped the siding. Metal groaned under pressure. Inside, it was quiet. Only her shallow breathing and the hum of the med table's diagnostics filled the space. Logan stepped back, removed his helmet, and scrubbed a hand down his face. What the hell was she doing out there? And why that phrase? Make me your personal slave, human. It hadn't sounded like a request. It sounded like a sentence she'd been forced to learn. Something burned into her, culturally, psychologically. Like the last card a dying prisoner was taught to play. If she was a Thari, one of the scattered alien subspecies caught in the chaos after the collapse, then she was likely taken during one of the outer system raids. Enslaved, shipped, resold, abused, broken. She didn't ask for help. She offered herself as property, because that's what the universe taught her she was worth. He moved to the corner, pulled an insulated chair to the wall, and sat down, watching her. She didn't move, but her hand, still beneath the blanket, trembled once. She was alive, and Logan hated that he knew what that kind of survival looked like. He'd seen it in war, in prisoners of conflict, in young boys forced to carry rifles taller than their bodies, in women trained to smile through screams, in his wife's eyes, that one time, that single moment of helplessness before the shuttle broke apart in orbit and left him screaming alone in a life pod. He stared at the fire core flickering in the distance. He hadn't saved her, but this one, this nameless, broken, half-frozen woman, she was still breathing. And whatever she thought she was worth, he would prove otherwise. Tomorrow, there would be questions, but tonight, there was only firelight and silence, and the first heartbeat inside this outpost that didn't belong to him in 3 long years. She didn't move for 12 hours. Not a twitch, not a murmur, just breath, thin and shallow, like her body had forgotten what normal living felt like. Logan checked her vitals on the med screen again. Slight improvements. Pulse irregular but climbing. Oxygen saturation stable. Core temperature within survival range. She would live, at least through the next cycle. He should have felt relief. Instead, he felt haunted. He stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, staring at the slight rise and fall of the blanket draped over her. The storm outside hadn't let up. The winds were screaming louder now, gusts slamming against the reinforced panels hard enough to shake loose dust from vents. And Karis, 12, was in full rage. Death lived out there in the cold. Yet somehow, she had made it to his door. She shouldn't have. And if he hadn't opened the hatch, she wouldn't have. That thought sat wrong in his gut. He turned away from her and stepped into the galley. The outpost was small, 3 rooms and a corridor that led to the generator below. He poured a cup of hot mineral tea, held it between both hands. Even with the heat running, the air was always dry here. Thin, like everything on Ankaris had to be earned, including breath. He sipped the tea, staring out the small hexagonal window near the sink. Nothing but snowblind white. When he returned to the med bay, she was awake. Not fully, but her eyes were open, slightly unfocused, blinking against the overhead light. Her head shifted just enough to register the room. Her lips moved without sound. Logan stepped forward slowly, crouched beside the table. "Can you hear me?" he asked. No response. He adjusted the light, dimmed it, careful not to overwhelm her. Her pupils were wide, a little slow to react. She turned her head toward the sound of his voice, but still didn't speak. He reached for the water flask on the tray, held it out to her. "You need fluids. Sip slowly." She stared at the flask. Then, without moving her eyes from his, reached up with her uninjured hand and took it. Her fingers trembled. She drank too fast. Coughed once, then again, the sound raw and painful. He didn't touch her, just waited. She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist. Then quietly she spoke. "Where is this?" "Outpost Theta 4, Southern Glacier Range." You're on Ancharis 12. That seemed to mean nothing to her. Cold planet, he added. Uninhabited. Except me. Her brows knit together slightly. Why? Because I like the quiet, he said. She looked away. He waited. After a moment, her gaze flicked back to him. Are you the owner here? The word hit harder than expected. I'm a station keeper. Only personnel within 200 clicks, he said. No one else is coming. She processed that in silence. Logan stood, walked to the shelf, and took out a nutrient bar. He unwrapped it and placed it on the tray near her hand. You haven't eaten in a long time. Start slow. Don't force it. She glanced at the bar, then at him again. Suspicion flickered across her face. Not the kind that questioned his motives, but the kind that questioned her right to eat at all. She didn't reach for it. You're safe here, he said. The words didn't land. She flinched slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough. Her entire frame tensed like those two words meant danger, not comfort. He sat down across the room, at the desk near the monitoring panel. Gave her space. Didn't speak again. 10 minutes passed. Finally, she reached for the food. She tore off a corner with her teeth, chewed quickly, swallowed hard. Her body jerked as the first bite hit her stomach. She paused, staring at her hands as if unsure they belonged to her. Then another bite, and another. When she was done, she sank back into the cot, drained. Her hands still clutched the wrapper. Logan leaned back in his chair. Do you remember how you got here? Her gaze fixed on the ceiling. I walked. In that storm. I didn't want to die in the cage, she said softly. A pause. He looked up. Someone was holding you? She nodded once. Were you on a ship? Docked. I escaped during refuel. It was dark, loud. I followed the snow. Her voice had a broken rhythm, like each word cost her something. You didn't know I was here. I didn't care. Silence stretched between them. Logan looked at the scar on her neck. The band he'd removed still sat on the metal tray beside the medkit. Property. The word might as well have been branded on her soul. Why did you say that? He asked quietly. She didn't pretend not to understand. That sentence, he added. When I found you. Her eyes closed. A shiver passed through her. Because it was the safest thing I could say. He didn't speak. It's what they taught us. If you're caught, offer yourself. Become useful. Become nothing. It might save your life. She opened her eyes again. It worked once. That made his chest tighten. You thought I'd hurt you. She nodded. I thought you'd accept the deal. I didn't, he said. No, she said, her voice nearly inaudible. You didn't. She shifted, wincing at the pain in her arm. He moved instinctively, but she held up a hand, weak but firm. I can do it, she said. Just slowly. Logan backed off. Sat again. Watched as she adjusted herself on the cot. Teeth clenched against the ache. Then, softly, you have a name? Logan. She repeated it once under her breath. Then, after a pause, Ithari don't have names. Not until they're free. He didn't say anything. Mine was taken, she added. When I was 10, Logan's hands tightened into fists, then slowly relaxed. I'm not going to ask what happened, he said. Not unless you want me to. Her eyes moved to his. For the first time, not with fear. With curiosity. Why are you alone here? She asked. His answer came slower. I lost people, he said. Family. In a crash. I was the only one they pulled out breathing. He didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. That was years ago. I came here after. For the quiet. She looked around. And did it help? Not really, he said. But there's no one here to ask questions. They sat in silence for a while. Then almost shyly she asked, what happens now? You rest. Eat. Get your strength back. And after? You decide. She stared at him for a long moment. No one's ever said that to me. He didn't answer. She lay back on the cot, her good hand resting over her chest, the other cradled by the stabilizer. Her breath slowed, steadied, but her body never fully relaxed. Sleep would come, eventually, but not trust. Not yet. Logan sat in the corner, arms crossed, listening to the wind. It beat against the outpost like it was trying to remind him that death was always outside. But tonight, someone had chosen life, even if she didn't know why yet. And maybe neither did he. The fire was the only source of warmth left when the storm devoured the power grid. It happened just after night's cycle began, as Logan sat reviewing equipment logs from the relay tower. The first sign wasn't noise, it was the sudden stillness. The subtle hum of machinery cut out in one breath, leaving a vacuum of silence so complete it set his nerves on edge. Then the lights dimmed, then died. He rose immediately, instinct overriding thought. In the hall, emergency strips flickered to life in soft orange hues, casting the narrow corridor in the glow of half-light. He moved quickly, shoulder brushing against the wall, steps heavy but practiced. In the med bay, Relira sat up, her face drawn in alarm, pupils wide in the dark. The blanket clutched around her frame trembled with her. "It's all right," Logan said. "Backup grid failed. Happens during magnetic storms. Just the wind getting cocky." She didn't respond, but her breathing hadn't steadied. He could see it, tight, rapid, shallow. Panic tried to find her, clawing at the edge of her restraint. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. She looked at it like it was a weapon. "I won't touch you unless you want me to," he said calmly. "But there's heat in the central room. You'll freeze here." Still no answer. So he stepped back. "I'll leave the door open." He disappeared into the corridor without waiting for a reply. In the center of the outpost, he'd already activated the combustion core, an old-fashioned emergency furnace installed in every solitary weather station across the ice belt. Small, fuel-efficient, and absurdly reliable. He stoked it to full flame and laid two thick furs on the grated floor nearby, one on either side. He didn't look up when she arrived, but he knew the moment she did. Her footsteps were slow, tentative, and far too quiet for someone uninjured. Still, she crossed the room, blanket wrapped around her like a second skin. She sat not close to him, but not across the room either. Somewhere in between, just within reach of the fire's glow. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The orange flame cast dancing shadows along the ceiling, flickering against their faces. The wind howled beyond the walls, a beast licking at the steel shell of their fragile refuge. Inside, everything was still, suspended. Relira held her hands out toward the heat. They were shaking. Logan glanced at her arm brace. The skin was inflamed around the pressure points. She hadn't said anything, but the pain was still there, lingering beneath the silence. He reached slowly for the med pack, placed it on the floor between them, and opened it. "Would you let me adjust the fit?" he asked gently. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the tools. "I can do it," she said. He nodded and slid the pack toward her. Her fingers were slow, deliberate. She loosened the binding herself, wincing only once. When it was done, she wrapped the blanket back around her frame and turned slightly toward the fire again. Logan leaned back against the bulkhead wall, arms crossed loosely. She spoke first. "I thought you'd chain me." His gaze flicked toward her, unreadable. "Why?" "Because that's what comes after food," she said. Her voice wasn't bitter, not even resentful, just tired, trained. "You show kindness. Then the chains come. That's not how things work here. I didn't think things worked at all on a world like this." He let that hang between them. "You're not the first broken thing to end up here," he said. That made her look at him. But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring into the fire. "There was a team before me. Scientists. Cartographers. They called it a terraforming test site. But the funding dried up. One by one, they were reassigned. Some didn't want to leave. One refused and froze 2 kilometers out." He paused. "I volunteered to come after. Permanent post." "Why?" He shrugged. "No one here to lie to." She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on him now, more openly than before. Studying, not in suspicion, but in calculation, quiet empathy, or perhaps the seed of it. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Then, "Do you believe in freedom?" He blinked. The question surprised him more than he expected. "I used to," he said. "And now, I believe in quiet." She turned toward the fire. "We're taught that freedom is just a word. You say it too many times and people notice. Then you disappear. Who teaches that? The ones with collars. And those who put them there." He didn't ask for details. Not yet. But she offered them anyway. "I was born a dome colony on Ithar 6. The moment my skin pigment darkened, I was tagged for auction." He felt his jaw clench. "We don't get names," she added. "Not officially. I was called the 137 for most of my early cycles. Do you have a name now?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then softly, Relira, he said it aloud, testing the sound. Relira. She looked at him sharply, not in alarm, but as if she didn't expect to hear it said without venom. I haven't heard it in someone else's voice for years, she murmured. It feels wrong. Feels real to me, he replied. She shifted slightly. Her shoulder brushed the edge of his fur. She didn't pull away. Outside, the wind slammed against the wall again. But neither of them moved. I had a daughter, Logan said suddenly. His voice had roughened. Relira turned her head. She was small, fierce, always insisted on sleeping near the fire, even on hot nights. He glanced at the flame. Her name was Lila. She died in a shuttle crash, along with her mother. A long silence followed. Then Relira said, I'm sorry. I'm the one who survived, he said. She lowered her gaze. Then, softly, I think surviving is the worst part. He nodded once. Sometimes. Their eyes met again. Not long, but long enough. Relira's voice dropped into a whisper. You don't want me, but you keep me alive. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned forward slowly, watching her face, giving her time to flinch, to back away, to say no. She didn't. He reached out, gently took her hand, the uninjured one, and brought it to his lips. Pressed a soft kiss against her palm. Her breath caught, not from fear, from confusion. She looked at their hands, then at him. You don't want to use me? No, he said. I want you to decide what you are. And if I don't know yet, then stay until you do. She nodded once. Then, for the first time, her body visibly softened. Just slightly. Just enough. She didn't speak again, and neither did he. But that night, she didn't return to the medbay cot. She stayed by the fire. Not close, but not far. And when she slept, her head resting on a folded blanket, her arm tucked beneath her body, her face was turned toward him. Logan didn't move. He sat with his back to the wall, eyes half closed, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath under the crackle of the flames. Not peace, not yet, but presence. And sometimes that was the beginning of everything. The storm broke with the sound of shattering silence. After 3 days of shrieking winds and walls that moaned under pressure, the sudden stillness made Logan stir. He opened his eyes slowly. The lounge was dim, painted in the orange glow of the dying fire core. Relira still slept beside it, curled into the makeshift bedding like a shadow learning warmth. Her breathing had steadied some time during the night. He didn't wake her. Instead, he rose and moved quietly through the corridor, resetting the generators now that the pressure outside had stabilized. With the storm retreating into the mountains, the outpost hummed softly back to life, systems blinking green, heaters re-engaging, diagnostics sinking. It was strange how quickly the cold could become a companion. Even stranger, how quickly silence had begun to feel shared. By the time he returned, she was awake, still wrapped in the blanket, her hair loose and slightly tangled. She sat cross-legged by the fire, hands cupped around a steaming mug of tea he hadn't seen her make. Her eyes found his as he stepped into the room. You were right, she said. He raised a brow. The fire is better than the insulation. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Just a flicker. But she noticed. The air between them felt different. Not warmer, but easier. Logan dropped into the chair across from her and picked up his own cup. For a while, they drank in silence, the fire crackling quietly. Outside, a thin blue hue began to break through the clouds, Ankara's closest imitation of dawn. Then Relira set her mug down carefully and looked up. I want to tell you something. Logan didn't move. I think you deserve to know who I am. He nodded once, giving her space. My name is Relira Teya, she said. I was born on Athar 6 in a biodome settlement controlled by the Syndicate of Systems. My people weren't citizens. We were labor-bred, registered under numerical tags at birth. Her voice remained steady, but her shoulders were tense. I was assigned to agricultural engineering. My aptitude scores were high. Too high. Someone noticed. I was pulled from the dome at 13. Sold to a trade broker from Vaxaprime. Logan listened without interrupting. After that, it was transport after transport. Contracts. Renegotiations. My body and my skills sold to whoever paid best. Some wanted a translator. Some wanted a servant. Some just wanted obedience. She exhaled. Her jaw flexed once. I ran 3 times. The 3rd time, they broke my arm. Kept it from healing. Said the scar would teach me not to disobey. Logan's hands tightened around his cup. I started learning ship codes, she continued. Listening. Watching. I waited. And 2 weeks ago, I used a breach in a dock's maintenance routine to override a secondary hatch. Slipped out wearing nothing but a thermal shift. Her eyes found his. I didn't know what planet I was on. I didn't care. I just didn't want to die in their hands. A beat of silence. You expected to die in mine. Yes. Logan didn't speak immediately. He let the words settle in the air, heavy but honest. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. You're not a thing, Relira. I don't know how to be anything else, she said. Not yet. He nodded slowly. That's okay. She blinked at him. Then, after a moment, asked, And you? What broke you enough to choose exile on this frozen world? He looked into the fire for a long time before answering. My name is Logan Miles, former combat engineer. I served in the Atrix border conflict. I wasn't built for war, but I knew how to build things. Bridges, bombs, outposts. His voice was steady but distant, like walking back into a dream you didn't want to remember. My unit was hit during a civilian extraction op. I made it out. Barely. After that, I got rotated out of combat duty. Took a shuttle with my wife and daughter to a rehabilitation colony. Relira stayed quiet, watching him. We never made it. He looked down into his cup. Some freighter's NAV system clipped our shuttle mid-flight. The rescue team pulled me from the wreckage. No one else. His throat tightened, just slightly. I signed up for Ankaris 2 months later. They said the silence would help. Did it? No. He glanced at her, but it made me honest. She gave a small nod, more acknowledgement than agreement. I kept seeing their faces. My daughter's shoes were still strapped in when they found her. I can't forget that. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. 2 people sitting on the far edges of ruin, looking at each other through the smoke of memory. Then Relira said quietly, You carry your guilt the same way I carry my chains. He met her gaze. I don't want to save you, Relira. She tilted her head. No, he said. I want you to learn what saving yourself looks like. Her throat bobbed. That's harder than you think. I know. They sat like that for a long while. The fire faded slowly, embers glowing soft red against the dark stone beneath it. Outside, the storm had passed completely, leaving only a world of white. Vast, empty, quiet. Logan stood. Come with me. She hesitated. He didn't repeat himself. Still wrapped in the blanket, she rose and followed him down the corridor, barefoot but steady. He led her to the observation room, a narrow alcove with a wide glass window facing the South Glacier fields. The sky above was clear for the first time in days. Ankaris was breathtaking when it wasn't trying to kill you. Endless plains of cracked ice, frozen ridges stretching like jagged scars, and above it all, stars, so many they looked like dust. Relira stepped closer to the glass. I've never seen it like this. Logan stood beside her. This station was built to watch the sky, he said, not survive it. And yet here you are, she murmured. He didn't reply, but when she turned to look at him, her eyes didn't carry fear anymore, just something quieter. Like maybe, for the first time, she believed she might stay. Not as a prisoner, not as a fugitive, but as something else entirely. And Logan, who had spent years believing silence was safer than connection, stood beside her and said nothing. Because sometimes no words were needed. The dead had been spoken for. The past had been named. And now, finally, there was room for something new. The sun didn't rise on Ankaris, 12. Not truly. But when the storms cleared and the sky opened for a few hours, the light shifted from darkness to an aching shade of blue that shimmered faintly across the endless snow. It wasn't warmth, but it was a kind of promise. And in this place, promises were rare. Inside the outpost, the silence was different now. Not dead or cold, but resting. Logan sat at the workbench, reassembling the primary comm array component with hands that moved from memory. The device wasn't broken. He wasn't even sure why he had taken it apart. Maybe he just needed to keep his hands busy. Maybe he needed something small he could fix. Behind him, Relira moved through the space. She didn't hover anymore. She walked barefoot, still careful, but not afraid to be seen. The thermal blanket was gone now, replaced by an old synth fiber jumpsuit he'd offered from the supply locker. It didn't fit her perfectly, loose at the shoulders, short at the ankles, but she wore it with quiet dignity, like it was the first thing that had ever truly been hers. She crossed to the food shelf, retrieved a pack of protein meal, and returned to the fire core. Sat down. Didn't look at him, but she didn't hide either. Logan watched her from the corner of his eye. Her movements were precise, methodical, like someone who had always been punished for taking up space and was only now relearning what it meant to exist without permission. I ran diagnostics on your arm, he said eventually. The fracture's healing faster than expected. She nodded. My kind regenerate soft tissue quickly, but the pain lingers longer. How bad is it? She hesitated. Manageable. He didn't push. She was beginning to speak more now, but it came in layers, guarded, economical, like someone rationing not just words, but trust. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then she asked quietly, "Why did you kiss my hand?" Logan didn't look up, because it felt like the right thing to do. But what did it mean? He set the half-assembled comm unit down and turned to face her. It meant that you're not a thing, he said. Not property, not a transaction. It meant you're a person, and that you mattered, even if it was just for that moment. She held his gaze. I didn't know it could feel like that, she whispered. A long pause. Then she stood, walked across the room, stopped in front of him. She looked different in the blue-hued light, less like a survivor, more like someone caught between past and possibility. Her dark hair framed her face in soft disarray. The bruises were fading, the haunted stillness in her eyes gradually giving way to something else. Not hope, not yet, but hunger. Not for food, not for safety, for identity. I've never touched someone by choice, she said, not without fearing what came next. She reached out, slowly. Fingers brushed the back of his hand, paused, trembled, then stayed. He didn't move. I don't want to be afraid of you, she said. But I am. You should be, Logan said quietly. Not because I'll hurt you, but because I'm still learning how not to hurt myself. She let out a slow breath. Her hand pulled back, not in retreat, but in thought. You remind me of a broken window, she said after a moment. He blinked. That's poetic. She shrugged. It's not a bad thing. Broken windows let air in. Sometimes light, sometimes storms. But they're honest. Logan chuckled. And what are you? I think I'm still the glass on the floor. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Instead, he stood, stepped around her, and retrieved something from the wall panel. A small, rounded object, tarnished metal with a leather strap. He returned and offered it to her. What is this? She asked. My daughter's music locket, he said. She used to wind it every night before bed. Said she couldn't sleep without it. Relira turned it in her hands carefully, reverently. Does it still work? Sometimes. She pressed the tiny latch. The sound that drifted out was fragile, warped with age, but still recognizable as melody. A lullaby, slow and simple. The kind meant to calm a child before dreams. Relira closed her eyes and listened. When the song faded, she handed it back. No one ever gave me anything they loved, she said. Logan didn't take the locket. He pushed it gently back into her hand. Then now someone has. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she pressed the locket to her chest. That night, the fire burned low, and the outpost felt heavier than usual. Logan lay on the cot in the med bay, fully clothed, half awake. The weight of memories pressed on him like snow on the roof. He heard the soft shift of footsteps in the corridor, but didn't rise. Then she appeared. Relira stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, eyes catching the glow of the emergency panel light. I can't sleep, she said. Too quiet. He sat up. Want to sit? She hesitated, then nodded. She crossed the room and sat on the floor beside the cot, her shoulder brushing the mattress. She didn't say anything else. Just close her eyes. Logan leaned back. Time passed. The quiet became less heavy. Then, softly, would it be all right if I stayed here? Just until I fall asleep? Yes, he said, as long as you need. She leaned her head against the edge of the cot, and after a long pause, he felt her fingers reach up, slowly, uncertainly, and wrap gently around his. Not desperate, not transactional, not as a slave, but as a woman who had survived enough to know how fragile trust could be, and who reached for it anyway. And Logan, who had once buried himself in silence, let her. Not because she needed it, but because he did too. The following morning began with stillness, so quiet it felt unnatural. Logan stirred before the station's lights cycled on, his body half draped over the cot, one hand hanging down where Relira had fallen asleep beside him. Her fingers still loosely held his, as though letting go would pull her back into a darker place. He watched her breathe, slow and steady, chest rising beneath the oversized thermal layer he'd loaned her days ago. The bruises on her skin were fading. Her voice had grown more steady. But trust, real trust, was something that still formed like ice on glass, fragile, easy to shatter. He eased his hand away, careful not to wake her, and stepped into the corridor. There were no alarms, no alerts, just that silence, the type Logan had learned to fear. He passed through the operations chamber, checking comm relays. The main antenna was still transmitting. Power flow was nominal. No weather anomalies. No seismic instability. And yet, he felt it. The shift. Something in the air was different. It wasn't until he reached the outer terminal, used to monitor low-orbit objects and deep-range pings, that he found the source. The log blinked red. Unidentified signal detected. Directional source. 74.19 degrees southeast quadrant. Surface level movement. Mass. Approximate 11 metric tons. Engine remnants detected. Heat trail active. Logan's breath caught in his throat. Wreckage. Someone else, something, was out there. He leaned closer to the screen. The data was jumbled, distorted by residual atmospheric static, but one phrase pinged out clearly. Transport designation, LK-391. His pulse slowed. That number, it wasn't random. He'd seen it before, etched into the metal band around Relira's wrist when he found her. She hadn't just escaped a ship. She'd escaped that ship, and now it was here, or part of it was. His hands hovered above the console. He could trace the trail, maybe even send out a drone. But he didn't. Instead, he turned and walked back into the outpost. She was already awake, sitting up now, legs tucked beneath her, staring at the cold hearth where the fire had died sometime in the night. She looked up at him as he entered, and something in her face told him she already knew. "What did you find?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "Wreckage," he said. "Not far from here, just beyond a ridge. Tracked a heat trail to a partial crash zone." She didn't blink. Designation was LK-391. Relira's body went still. "That was the last ship I was on," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, but her hands had curled into fists. "There may be survivors," Logan said. "Or something worse. No one survives those ships," she said. "Not like that. If it crashed, it wasn't an accident. It means someone hunted it, or something on board went rogue." Her jaw clenched. "If they're here, they'll come looking for what they lost." He didn't ask if she meant herself. He knew. "We'll be ready," he said. Relira shook her head. "You don't understand. I wasn't cargo. I was the backup system." Logan frowned. "Explain." "They encoded station protocols into me," she said. "Language fragments. Command hierarchies. Slave obedience functions. I was trained to reboot operations on colony outposts. Infiltrate native systems. Calm prisoners. You're not a weapon." She said quietly. "I was built to make people obey." "Not anymore." Her voice cracked. "You think the training just disappears?" "No," he said. "But I think the person you're becoming is stronger than the one they made you to be." She looked away, but he could see her breathing hard now, shoulders shaking. He crossed the room, knelt beside her. "You're allowed to be angry," he said. "You're allowed to be scared." She turned toward him, eyes shimmering with something she hadn't let rise before. "But I don't know what to do with it," she whispered. "Then give it to me," he said. "Let me carry some of it." She stared at him, then reached for him. And this time, when she touched his face, there was no hesitation. Her fingers brushed his jaw, tentative but real. She leaned in, not to seek protection, not to beg, but to meet him equal in the moment. Her forehead rested against his. "I don't know what this is," she whispered. "Neither do I," Logan murmured. "But I don't want it to end." She nodded. Then, slowly, she kissed him. It wasn't practiced or perfect. Her lips trembled. His breath caught. But it was real. A kiss between two people who'd forgotten what it meant to feel alive, and had just remembered. When they pulled apart, the air between them was warmer than fire. And outside, the ice shifted, a low rumble across the plains. Something had arrived. But inside the station, Logan pulled her closer, not because she was broken, but because she was choosing to be whole. The air was too still. Logan and Rhalyra moved through the glacier's teeth, white and fractured, ice glinting like shards of broken sky. Ahead, half buried and smoking, was what remained of LK 391, the ship that had once carried her, broken open like a carcass on the ridge. But this wasn't just wreckage. This was a graveyard of systems, of commands, of silence. They stood at the edge of the crater, both quiet, breath fogging in the morning chill. Logan looked at her, but Rhalyra said nothing. She stared at the torn hull the way a soldier might stare at the battlefield where they died, but kept breathing. Then she stepped forward. He followed her inside. The ship was dark, lit only by flickering red emergency strobes that pulsed like dying veins. The air was cold and stale, heavy with chemical dust. Bits of insulation hung from the walls like frozen cobwebs. Everything stank of old fire and failed power. It had hit hard. Metal groaned beneath their feet. They passed what had once been the transport bay. The restraints were still mounted to the walls. Some had bloodstains, others bore broken shackles. Rhalyra slowed near one of them. She reached out. Her fingers hovered over a notch in the metal. "I carved my mark here," she said softly, "so I wouldn't forget who I was." Logan said nothing. There was nothing to say. She kept walking, through corridors choked with debris, through what had once been a containment chamber, through the shadowed memories of a life spent surviving orders instead of living. And then they heard it. Movement. Soft. Deliberate. Ahead, behind a fallen hatch door, a figure rose. Not a shadow. Not a ghost. A man, or what was left of one. He was tall but twisted. One side of his face was burned. Flesh melted and fused into the metal of a cracked exosuit. His right arm was gone, replaced by a crude mechanical brace. Wires snaked into his spine. His eye flickered red, artificial and erratic. But Rhalyra knew him before he spoke. 137, he rasped, voice like broken glass. "You ran." She froze. "Jax," she said. Her voice was a whisper, but it shook with something old, something raw. Logan glanced at her. "You know him?" Her eyes never left the man. "He was my final handler," she said. "He didn't use the leash. He rewrote my personality code directly. Said I was too independent." Jax laughed. A wet, gurgling sound. "You were efficient," he slurred, "but not obedient enough. I fixed that." "You broke me," she said, "but you didn't erase me." "You fled," he said. "That wasn't in your programming. I rewrote my own code." He reached for something on his chest plate, a control node glowing faintly red. "Then obey." One final time. Logan moved first, but Rhalyra stepped forward. "No," she said. She drew the small blade from her belt. "I obey me." She drove it into the center of his chest plate, right where the node pulsed. Sparks exploded. Jax convulsed, arm flailing. His eye blinked furiously, then dimmed. He collapsed at her feet. Smoke hissed from the hole in his chest. She stared at him for a long time, then reached down and tore the control module from his skull. Its glow flickered, then died. She turned and held it out to Logan. "Fire." He handed her the torch. She dropped the module in the snow and incinerated it. They watched in silence as the plastic and metal curled inward and blackened, vanishing into nothing. When it was done, Rhalyra stood there breathing hard, but her hands were steady. She looked back at the ship one last time. "It's over," she said. "No," Logan said. "You ended it." She nodded. "Let's go home." They didn't look back again. The outpost never felt more like a sanctuary than it did that night. Logan rebuilt the fire by hand, even though the generator was working again. Rhalyra sat on the floor beside the flames, legs pulled to her chest, eyes reflecting the flicker. She wasn't shaking. She was still, not empty, whole. He joined her, sat beside her, didn't say anything for a while. Then he offered a cup of tea. She took it, hands brushing his. I thought I'd feel grief, she said, or rage, but all I feel is quiet. Maybe that's what healing starts with, Logan said. I never thought I'd get this far. You earned it. She looked up at him and smiled. Do you still want me? She asked quietly. Now that I've burned the last piece of who I was? He reached for her hand. I don't want what you were, he said. I want who you are. And I love who you're becoming. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him, slowly, tenderly. Not like the night before, not as confirmation, but as continuation. And when they lay down together, it wasn't about passion alone. It was about knowing there was nothing left to hide, only to build, only to live. Outside, Ancaris shimmered in the long night, cold and endless. But inside the outpost, the warmth was real. The silence had changed. And in that silence, Logan and Rhalyra breathed, healed, and finally stayed. Together. The day began with quiet laughter. Not loud, not sudden, just a soft, surprise sound. So natural it startled both of them. It came from Rhalyra. Logan looked up from the snow shelter he was building against the side of the outpost, eyebrows raised in amusement. Her face, barely visible beneath the scarf wrapped around her neck, was flushed with cold and something else. Joy. You're laughing, he said, half smiling. That's new. I didn't mean to, she replied, her breath misting in the air. You looked ridiculous. That's all. He glanced down at the structure. His gloves were soaked, the snow walls uneven. One corner had collapsed under its own weight. You try building a storm break with frozen fingers. She shrugged. I would, but someone won't let me shovel. You fractured your arm 2 weeks ago. It's healed, mostly. She walked over anyway, taking the shovel from where it leaned against the wall. Then let me fail, Logan. I won't break. That stopped him. Not the words, but the confidence in them. They echoed nothing of the woman who'd flinched at every sound, who'd once believed safety came from submission. He handed her the shovel. Together, they rebuilt the snow wall side by side. Logan laid the base layers while Rhalyra packed the edges, shaping the ice with practiced movements. She was stronger than she looked. Always had been. The sun, or what passed for it on Ancaris 12, hovered low above the horizon, casting silver light across the glacier fields. For once, there was no storm, no distant howling, just the gentle wind brushing snow into patterns too delicate to last. When the shelter was done, Logan brushed his gloves off and leaned against the outer wall. Rhalyra stood back, admiring their crooked, lopsided creation. It's terrible, she said, completely unusable. They both laughed this time. Logan shook his head. I'll call it the fortress of not quite death. She raised an eyebrow. I prefer the coldest bench in the galaxy. I'm not sure we should ever collaborate on naming anything. Oh, we shouldn't, she said seriously. I was given a barcode instead of a name. You once named a communications satellite Squeaky. It was squeaky, not the point. They looked at each other and laughed again. When they finally went inside, the outpost felt different. Not warmer, though the heat systems hummed softly, but fuller, alive in ways it hadn't been in years. Logan poured hot tea into 2 mismatched mugs and handed one to Rhalyra. She took it without hesitation now. Her hands no longer trembled when they touched. They sat on a lounge bench, wrapped in a shared wool blanket that smelled faintly of dust and old cedar. Logan's shoulder pressed lightly against hers. I used to count the days here, he said suddenly. Measure time by storms. Every gust of wind was just another reason to forget the world had moved on. Rhalyra turned her head. And now? I still count the days, he said, but I measure them by something else. She didn't need to ask what. Her fingers found his beneath the blanket. They drank their tea in companionable silence. Outside, Snow drifted lazily past the viewport, catching the light like falling stars. The figure Elira had carved, the small totem of her people, sat on the sill, watching the ice like a quiet sentinel. After a while, Logan spoke again. "I was wrong before," he said. "About what?" "About not wanting to save you." She looked at him thoughtful. "You didn't save me," she said softly. "You just didn't stop me from saving myself." He smiled. "That's a better version of the truth." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think maybe this is what we were both meant to find? Not rescue, not redemption, just quiet. Quiet with someone in it," he said. "That's the difference." She tilted her head up and kissed him. It was gentle, not hesitant, not urgent, just right. And when they pulled apart, the smile that lingered on her lips wasn't fragile anymore. It was real. Later, she fell asleep in his arms, curled beneath the blanket, one hand still resting over his heart. Logan stayed awake for a while, watching the snow, listening to her breath, thinking about how, just weeks ago, this world had been nothing but punishment and silence. Now it was something else, something he didn't have a name for. Not yet, but maybe tomorrow he'd find the word. And if not, that was okay, because for the first time in years, he had time and someone to share it with. Not a ghost, not a survivor, just her, Relira, his choice. And now, finally, her own. The fire had burned down to embers, the kind that glowed low and steady, casting the outpost in a velvet darkness where every shape softened, every breath felt louder, and time lost its edges. Relira stirred against Logan's chest. They lay beneath a thick blanket on the makeshift couch, her head tucked into the curve of his shoulder, his arm draped protectively around her waist. Their legs were entangled beneath the layers of fabric, sharing warmth the station's heaters could never quite replicate. Neither of them had spoken for some time. They didn't need to. Logan had been tracing slow circles along her back, fingertips grazing the fabric of her worn thermal shirt, more instinct than thought. Her body responded with subtle shifts, a press of her thigh, a flex of her fingers around his. But it wasn't the touch that changed the air between them. It was the stillness. Not fear, not paralysis. Trust. Real, bone-deep trust. She lifted her head and looked at him, her violet eyes catching the glow of the last coals, her gaze soft but searching. There was something different in the way she looked at him now. Not like a rescuer, not like a stranger, but like something undeniably hers. "Logan," she whispered, her voice low, the word brushing against his neck like a pulse. He tilted his head slightly, eyes meeting hers. "Yeah." She didn't answer. Instead, she kissed him, slow and deliberate. Not tentative, not questioning. Her lips moved against his with aching patience, and when he responded, it was with a reverence that made her breath catch. She shifted, straddling his lap, her knees settling on either side of his thighs. Her hands came to his jaw, holding him like something sacred, and when she looked down at him, there was no hesitation. Only heat, only wonder. "This is mine to choose," she said softly. "It always was," he murmured. Her fingers slipped under the hem of his shirt, palms skating over the firm, scarred plane of his stomach. He breathed in sharply, his hands rising to her hips but stopping there, asking. She nodded. That was all he needed. He sat up, their bodies close now, chest to chest, heat passing between them in waves. She slipped his shirt over his head with quiet focus, like the act itself meant something. To her it did. He wasn't just a man. He was a world that had let her in. And when he reached for her shirt, slow, deliberate, she let him pull it over her shoulders. Beneath it, her skin was flushed and luminous in the firelight, marked with old bruises, healing scars, and something far more powerful. Survival. He touched her like he was learning a language, his fingertips tracing from her collarbone to the curve of her shoulder, down the length of her back. She arched into it, breath catching, head tipping slightly as her body reacted not out of fear but longing. Every sound she made was quiet at first, but real. When he kissed her neck, she let out a sigh so soft it trembled through him. And when she moved, pressing herself against him, guiding their rhythm, her breath grew heavier, deeper, filled with want. She moved with purpose, not to please, to feel. And he let her take control, not out of uncertainty, but because he wanted to see her claim something, finally, without permission. She rolled her hips once, slow, seeking. He exhaled against her throat, his hands tightening at her waist. Her eyes fluttered shut as she sank fully into him, their bodies aligned like they'd been shaped by the same storm. Her moan, soft and shaky, broke something in him, because it wasn't pain. It wasn't silence. It was freedom. "Relira," he whispered like a prayer. Her forehead rested against his, breath hot against his cheek. "I didn't know it could feel like this," she said between sighs, "like I'm inside my own skin for the first time." "You are," he murmured. "You are." She moved again, slow and fluid, her hands braced on his shoulders, her thighs tightening around his hips. Their rhythm built naturally, unhurried, born not of lust, but of need, to be close, to be real, to be seen. Each motion was a conversation, each gasp an answer. He held her like something fragile, but she met his touch with strength, grounding him in her body, in her presence, in this moment where nothing else existed. When release finally came, it wasn't explosive. It was a falling into light. Her back arched, a low, surprised cry slipping from her lips as his arms pulled her closer, burying his face in her shoulder, losing and finding himself all at once. They held onto each other long after the motion stopped, long after the tremors faded, wrapped in warmth and breath and the kind of silence that heals. She stayed in his lap, head tucked in his neck, chest still rising and falling in soft waves. He kissed her temple, her cheek, the corner of her mouth, every place he could reach without letting her go. "You okay?" he whispered. She smiled against his skin. "I've never been more than okay." Outside, the wind picked up again, but it didn't matter. Because inside, in the hush between two heartbeats, something new had taken root. Not just desire, not even love, but wholeness. And they fell asleep like that, naked, twined, free, not because the storm had passed, but because for the first time they had stopped running and chosen to stay. The outpost had never felt so still. No alarms, no wind clawing at the walls, just the subtle hum of the life support systems and the soft rhythm of breath. Pale light spilled through the viewport, casting long, honey-colored shadows across the floor and over two bodies tangled together in quiet peace. Relira stirred first. She blinked, slow and sleepy, her lashes brushing against Logan's bare chest. For a moment, she didn't move. She simply listened to the beat of his heart beneath her ear, to the slow inhale and exhale that matched her own, to the absolute safety in the way he held her. His arm was draped across her waist, his hand resting gently against the curve of her back. Like even in sleep, he didn't want to let go. She smiled, not because she felt victorious, not because she'd finally earned something, but because for the first time in her life, waking up didn't feel like punishment. It felt like something sacred. She shifted slightly, just enough to raise her head and look at him. He was already awake. His eyes opened slowly, and when they met hers, he didn't flinch. He didn't mask. He just looked steady and unguarded. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. Her smile deepened. "Is it, by Ankara standards?" "Technically, yes." She reached up and brushed her fingers through the disheveled strands of his hair. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you." There was a pause, not uncomfortable. Then, quietly, "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Are you?" He paused, then smiled. "I think I'm more than okay." He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, slow and deliberate, then her temple, then the corner of her mouth. It wasn't lustful this time. It wasn't desperate. It was an act of presence, of affection, of permanence. She traced a finger down his arm. "Last night, it didn't feel like the first time." "No," he said. "It felt like the first right time." She exhaled, her head lowered back to his chest, eyes drifting shut again. But then her stomach growled. Loudly. They both froze. Logan looked down at her. She groaned. "That wasn't me. That was a ghost. A very hungry ghost. I regret nothing." He laughed, and the sound was so human, so unburdened that it startled them both. "Come on," he said, sitting up, pulling the blanket with him. "Let's feed the ghost. Only if you let me help cook this time." "You sure?" She raised a brow. "Logan, I rebuilt part of your comm tower blindfolded. I think I can manage eggs." "We don't have eggs. Then you're the one cooking." They laughed again, and it filled the outpost, not with echoes, but with warmth. In the galley, they worked together, shoulder to shoulder, bumping elbows and stealing glances. Logan made a nutrient stew with spices he had been saving for no reason, until now. Relira set the table, such as it was, and placed the carved Athari totem in the center like a centerpiece. "Looks like a home now," she said softly. He nodded. They sat down to eat. Halfway through the meal, Logan looked at her, really looked at her. "What happens now?" he asked. She met his gaze without fear. "Whatever we want."